What is up YouTube, Nyks here, back with another video, and this time we're going to be looking at the PC requirements to run Bliss Online. Okay, so this is not going to be a definitive guide to running Bliss Online, because currently it still hasn't been fully optimized, at least to the point where I would be happy with it. I think they still have a lot of work to go in terms of the optimization. They have fixed some stuff with regards to memory usage, but it's still not where I would want it to be. With that being said, this guide is just going to give you a general overview of how you can spec your computer if you are planning to build a computer that's going to run Bliss, or upgrade your computer that you currently have to run the game better. This is specifically going to target the Japanese client of the rebuild project, because as far as I know, that is the version which is the furthest ahead at this point. So the way I'm going to do this is I'm going to split the categories into the main three. So people that just want to play this game at low settings, or the minimum requirements, people that want to play at the medium settings, the recommended requirements, and the people that want to play with the highest preset available, that is the people who want to max out. For each of these categories, in my opinion, a playable FPS is considered to be 60, so these specs are going to go according to that. So if you're running at low settings at smooth frame rates, that basically indicates that you'll be running at 60 FPS most of the time. Again, there are situations where you won't be getting 60 FPS even with the highest end computer, because you know the game isn't optimized, so you can't just brute force hardware to the point where you aren't getting FPS drops. Again, this is situational. There will be areas in the game where you will get FPS drops. It's inevitable. If you go into the main towns, main cities where there's a lot of people, there's a lot of buildings, and the game has to constantly load those things up, you are inevitably gonna get a frame drop. It might not be as big, say go to like 60 FPS to like 40 FPS, which is not that bad considering the amount of people that are loaded in. So you know, it's not going to be a constant FPS, I can't guarantee that, but with these settings you will get 60 FPS the majority of the time that you're questing or just out and about in the world. Okay, so with that out of the way, let's just get into it. So for the people that just want to run the game at low settings, or you know, just get a feel of the game, these are the settings that I would advise. For your CPU, you'd want something that is an i3 which is hyper-threaded. This is really important because the game, from the testing that I've done, and keep in mind all the information that I'm telling you guys is from the things that I've tested in my videos, and you know, listening to some of your guys' feedback, you know, in the comments, and generally just from the discussions that we've had around the issue of Bliss's performance. So you'd want an i3 with hyperthreading. The reason I say that is, from what I've seen, the game is able to utilize as many cores as you can throw at it. From my own runs, I've seen that with an i5 6600K overclocked to 4.5 gigahertz, I think, all the cores spike up to 100% or thereabout. So to run the game smoothly, I would say at low settings, I would really advise getting something with at least 4 threads. You don't have to have 4 physical cores. That's why I kind of referred to the i3. So yeah, that should be the CPU out of the way. Next up we have the graphics card. For this, you don't need anything too hefty. So from the comments that I've seen with regards to the GPU, people have been able to run this game with a GT 640 with 2 GB of video memory. Personally, I'm running a R9 280, which is a really old graphics card, but the game seems to run fine. From the GPU usage, it hovers in the low 70s to high 90s. With regards to the amount of VRAM you'll need, anything above 2 gigs is fine. Currently the game only utilizes about 1 gig of VRAM, which is really small. I think if they are going to fix this issue with the memory leaks, it is going to have some type of impact on the VRAM usage. So I would advise getting something with at least 2 gigs of VRAM on it, just so you can run the game. But if you just want to run the rebuild project, anything above 1 gig is fine. Okay, next up we have the memory, more specifically the RAM. Now this is where it kind of gets tricky. So from my testing, 8 gigs of RAM is quite literally the bare minimum you will need to run this game, at least for the reboot project anyway. You'll see from the SSD video that I did, my 8 gig RAM configuration basically gets fully saturated when I have the game running, and this is further complicated when you run the game for extended periods of time, where you get memory leak issues and your virtual memory kind of hits around, like 10-11 gigs. So memory is a big issue. You're kind of gonna need 8 gigs of RAM just to get the game running, at least for the time being anyway. In terms of storage, since we're just looking at low settings, a normal hard drive will do you fine. I would prefer getting a hard drive with a faster RPM. This usually results in faster read times, which may help the game, but I'm not too sure on that. Preferably I would advise getting an SSD, but if you can't do that, then a normal hard drive should be able to run the game fine. So that's all the low settings sorted. With that configuration, you should be able to get 60 FPS basically anywhere in the game. Apart from the main cities, you might expect some stuttering to happen in the hubs or when the game is loading in a new map, but that's to be expected. You're running on low settings, you should be fine. Okay, next up we have medium settings. For the CPU, you're going to be looking at a i5, preferably something that can be overclocked, but if you're not into that kind of stuff, just get a normal i5. It'll practically be the same. But keep in mind, if you can get something with a higher core count, like an i7, it is preferred, but to run on medium settings, you don't really need it, right? If your plan is to run the game at a decent graphic quality, it's going to be fine. And on the AMD side, if you don't want to get an Intel processor, then you'd be looking at something like a R5 1600, which is a 6-core 12-thread processor, if I'm not being mistaken, but these two hover around the same price point, so you should be fine. In terms of graphics, nothing's really changed. You can get a GTX 1060, doesn't really matter at this point because, as I said earlier, the game isn't really utilizing your graphics card as well as it should be. So anything that hovers around the performance of a R9 280, which is currently what I have, should run the game completely fine. For memory, we have 12 gigs of RAM this time, just because when you're running at medium settings, again, you're going to have that memory leak issue, so you might as well upgrade to 12 gigs of RAM and make sure that you can run this game for at least 3 hours without experiencing, any paging file problem where it starts storing things on your storage and using your virtual memory rather than your physical RAM. And in terms of storage, we have an SSD. Something like a Samsung 850 EVO will do just fine. Again, I'm not recommending a Nvme here. You don't really need an Nvme, it's kind of overkill, but getting an SSD would make a world of difference. Having those fast read and write speeds, especially read speeds, will allow you to pull textures and load things faster into the game, which again will help quite a lot with stuttering. And yeah, it's just generally really nice just to have in your system. So yeah, if you want to run the game at medium settings, The main things you want is an i5, 12 gigs of RAM, and a normal SATA SSD. Alright, lastly we have high settings. At high settings you can really, sky's really your limit. But here is my kind of baseline if you want to run this game at high settings. Now keep in mind, I run this game currently at high settings, and my frame rates are fine. In the cities, I'll link the SSD video in the description below, but in the cities I was getting really decent frame rates, 60 FPS to 40 FPS. That was kind of the average, 40 being the lowest point, but most of the time it will be hovering around 60. But the settings that I'm about to show you guys should be able to get even better frames, and this would be my recommended configuration to run high settings. Alright, so for the CPU you have a i7-8600K. Again, this is a 6-core 12-thread processor, high core counts. As we know, the game can utilize more cores, so the more the merrier. For your GPU, I kind of went overkill here with a 1070. Again, you don't need a GTX 1070. I'm currently running the R9 280, and I can run the game at high settings. So overkill, but I just put it in there because it's the configuration that I would recommend. For memory, we bumped it up again to 16 gigabytes of RAM. This will just really make sure that you never hit the memory leak ceiling, because it does seem to taper off after about 12 gigs ish from my testing. So with 16 gigs you can be sure that even if you're running the game for like 5-6 hours straight at once, you shouldn't have any problems. And lastly, for the storage, I chose a Nvme drive, more specifically the Samsung 960 Evo. This is a really good drive. It's the one that I have installed in my system, and it literally removed the stuttering that I was experiencing, drastically reducing load times. Characters load up really quickly. They load up instantly, to be honest. Again, having an Nvme just means that your read speeds are ridiculously faster, even when compared to SSDs. They're like 5 times faster. So again, those help. And yeah, those are my recommended specs that you would want to run if you want to play the game at high settings. Alright, so I know this was kind of a long video, but I just want to get it out there in case, some of you guys were building a computer just for Bless, because I know that during some game launches, people do tend to do this. So yeah, I hope this helped you guys out. And yeah, like if you liked the video, dislike if you didn't like it, subscribe if you're new to the channel, it helps me out a lot. And yeah, I'll see you soon. Peace.